Hello and welcome to SentencingStats.com. I am Mark Allenbaugh. It is Saturday, December 9th, 2017, and this is our weekly sentencing roundup. In this episode, we will be covering two recent cases. One is the plea and possible sentencing, or there will be a sentencing, for the rap artist known as DMX. And also we'll review the sentence that was just handed down against Dr. Larry Nassar, who was the physician for the women's Olympic team. So let's go ahead and start with DMX. And DMX is, for those of you who don't know, DMX is a famous rap artist. His real name is Earl Simmons. He's been around for quite some time. And he pleaded guilty on November 30th, as we see here, to criminal tax fraud. Essentially, he had failed to file taxes for a number of years. We can see down here to the tune about $2.3 million. So, what sentence can he expect? Well, first off, although he was charged with several counts of tax evasion and tax fraud, pursuant to his plea agreement, or at least as reported in the press. His plea agreement is not publicly available as of yet. He pled guilty to just one count of tax evasion pursuant to 26 U.S.C. 7201, and that carries a 5-year statutory maximum penalty. So at most, he's looking at 5 years of imprisonment. But this is a rather large amount of income that he did not report for those years. So the chances of him getting probation, which we always assume, especially in white-collar cases, that's the default sanction, if you will, that a white-collar offender such as DMX would be shooting for, the chances of that look pretty slim. So let's go ahead and look through. We'll use our online tool at SentencingStats.com. And again, SentencingStats.com is the premier online tool for attorneys and their clients to evaluate the U.S. Sentencing Commission's sentencing data files. We provide access to the 2006 through 2016 data files, and of course update that every year when new data is released. So you're looking here at DMX, putting in his case number and all the demographics here. I've already inputted all the relevant information here, but this again is essentially how our tool works, what we call our case wizard, that a user can go through and input relevant information to do a sentencing analysis. So here, as we know, he pled guilty, so we're going to select as the mode of conviction the fact that he pled guilty. But at SentencingStats.com, you can also, if you wanted to, filter down by the type of plea, whether it's by a plea agreement or an open plea. An open plea is basically pleading open or straight up to an indictment without a plea agreement, or a nolo plea, which is a very rare plea at the federal level. Essentially, it's a no contest plea. That's literally what it means, and it's for purposes of preserving for preserving the ability to defend any civil actions that are brought against the defendant. So we've selected that he pled guilty. He'll certainly be sentenced under 2T1.1, the tax evasion guideline. We calculated his final offense level based upon the amount of tax that he likely will, the amount of tax loss that will be calculated under the guidelines. We calculated his final offense level to be 21, and we're going to assume that his target sentence is going to be around a year. So what a target sentence, selecting the target sentence, as you'll see, that gives the user the ability to see where a particular sentence might lie relative to the average or median. And we're going to assume that he's in criminal history category 1. I do not know DMX's criminal history, but if he has any prior felonies, that will increase his criminal history category. So we're going very conservative here. But if he has a higher criminal history category, then of course he's looking at a higher sentence. But again, we're assuming that he has little to no criminal history here. And we're going to select for our charts just the average sentence. And what we can see up here, by the way, excuse me, I'm jumping forward. Here's the case summary. Once you've inputted all the information relative to your case, this will give you the number of cases that match the criteria you've selected. And here we have 135 cases that match those that have been sentenced under 2T 1.1 with a final offense level of 21 in criminal history 1 that have pleaded guilty. So pretty much identical, assuming that DMX has criminal history 1, essentially would be identical to DMX for guidelines application purposes. In the Second Circuit, which is the circuit that he's in, there have only been 14 cases since 2006. By the way, this is covering all from 2006 to 2016. Of course, you can shorten those years if you're only interested, let's say, in the last 5 years or something like that. You can just select that period of time if you wanted. And in the Southern District of New York, which is where he pled guilty, there have been 4 matching those criteria. And again, offense level 21, criminal history 1, the sentencing range pursuant to the sentencing guidelines, and these are just advisory, is 37 to 46 months. So let's go ahead and see what he can expect. What do the statistics tell us? So here, out of those 135 nationwide, the average sentence was 26 months and the median was 27 months. Almost 2/3 of all of those offenders received a below guideline sentence, either as a result of a 5K 1.1 motion for cooperation or because the judge exercised his or her authority to sentence below the guidelines, and that's called a variance. So this could be for any departure or any variance reason, but nearly 2/3 received a below guideline sentence. The maximum sentence was 60 months, and that's exactly the maximum sentence that that DMX is looking at, but more likely along these ranges here. And then we can see what the average sentence. The average sentence is a bit lower in the Second Circuit, but about matches the national for those 4 cases that we found in the Southern District of New York. So here is a chart, obviously, that shows the average sentence. This is what we call a trend analysis. It shows what the average sentence for this group of individuals for the criteria that we selected, what it has been over time. And what you can do is obviously print these out and make them into exhibits to show your judge or to show your client, or for the client to show his or her attorney. You can select to actually show on the chart what the averages were for that particular year. Just going back here to, as of last year, the average sentence was 30 months. Here, the target sentence of 12 months, or really 12, we could put in there 12.03. 12.03 is a year and a day. That's significant because at that point, once a sentence of a year and a day or greater is now eligible for good time credit, a sentence of exactly 1 year or less is not eligible for any good time credit. So very often defendants will seek to have a sentence of no less than a year and a day, or if it's going to be less than a year and a day, it's better to get, let's say, like a sentence of 10 months or less, because you will get about 85 or 15% of that sentence deducted for good time credit if it's a year and a day or more. So a year and a day here is running at about the 15.7th percentile, and what that means, it's on the low side. It's greater than only 15.7% of all the 135 cases that we found in this group. So point being that the chance of him getting around a year and a day is not high, and we could say it's somewhat low. Those sentences are not rare. As a matter of fact, people have received, where it says a minimum sentence here of a 0, that indicates that people received a sentence of a probation or non-custodial time. A 0 could also include something like home detention or a halfway house, things of that nature. So the average sentence, again, as of last year, was 30 months, which is a little bit higher than if we looked at the average cumulatively. If we added up all the years together, we only had a 26 months average sentence. And there's been, as we can see here, an upward trend since 2013 for these individuals. Here, this indicates the rate of judge-initiated downward variances. So for those 135 individuals, how frequently are judges exercising their discretion under 18 U.S.C. 3553 to sentence below the guideline range. And we can see here right after Booker, the Booker case, that's why we start in 2006, they were exercising their discretion to sentence below the guideline range just over a quarter of the time. And that, again, that's specifically for this group of defendants who are sentenced under 2T1.1, final offense level 21, criminal history 1, and who had pleaded guilty. So that's indicated up here, as you can see under the title of this chart. And it's varied quite a bit. And that's to be expected because there's not that many cases, so the volatility of the graph will be rather significant as the number of cases decreases. At any rate, looking last year, about 18.8%. 18.8% of the time, judges exercise their discretion to sentence below the guideline range for this class of offenders. So, again, not rare, but not likely. Very often, judges are sentencing within the guideline range here. And just return here again to look at what the actual sentencing guideline range is, 36 to 46 months, and the average and medians are not too far off the bottom of that range. So this doesn't include, we did not analyze for the frequency of judges granting 5K motions for cooperation. So that obviously is another factor that DMX may want to look at if it's relevant to him. But there's no indication that there's any cooperation going on in this case. This is just him failing to file taxes. So finally, we looked overall at this is a cumulative graph as opposed to a trend. So when judges do sentence below the guideline range, exercising their discretion to do so, how far below the range are they going? And on average, they're going 18 months below that, the bottom of the guideline range, which again is 37 to 46 months. So, and that sums up for DMX. Unfortunately for DMX, it looks like he will be doing some time, and not just a few months, but statistically speaking, he's looking at least a couple of years. Of course, there will always be factors specific to a particular defendant that may warrant a lower sentence. There could be several mitigating factors in this case. One of the big issues, of course, in tax cases is calculating the tax fraud or the tax loss. The default under the guidelines for individuals is 28%. Here we don't know what the parties may have agreed on since the plea agreement isn't part of the public record at this time. But nonetheless, once that comes out, that could change, obviously, this analysis, and we'll revisit it as we get closer to sentencing in his case. So now let's look over to Dr. Nassar. Dr. Nassar was the physician for the women's Olympic team for a number of years. It has recently come out, unfortunately, that he had engaged in a lot of sexual assaults. He was a serial sexual assaulter of many of the members of the Olympic team, and was discovered to have a significant amount of child pornography on his home laptop. This past Thursday, 2 days ago, he received a rather significant sentence of 60 years, which was the statutory maximum sentence available for the judge. And statutory maximum sentences are very, very rarely imposed. Since this was a child pornography case, we know that he was sentenced under 2G 2.2. So we're going to go through our wizard again here. I've already filled everything in. And we're not going to worry about elite statute or statutory maximum here, since we already know he pled guilty. What would be of interest here to a defendant or an attorney, especially if there is going to be an appeal considered, is how does this particular sentence look relative to all sentences imposed under this particular guideline? So we do know, I don't have access to the plea agreement, or I did not review the plea agreement here, but I can infer from the press release that he had a final offense level of 42, which includes takes into account his acceptance of responsibility. A final offense level of 42 in criminal history 1 is an advisory sentencing range of 360 months to life. We do know that he received a 60-year sentence, which is 720 months. So we're going to filter, we're going to include that target sentence in our charts, but we're not going to filter on offense level 42, at least at this point. And this way we can see that the case summary is, that the case count is pretty significant here. So we want to look at what kind of sentence. So as we can see here, there have been 12,810 individuals sentenced between 2006 and 2016 under 2G 2.2, which is the general non-production child pornography guideline range that were in criminal history 1. If we were to turn this filter on at a final offense level of 42, we're going to see that number goes down considerably, just to 122 individuals. But for our purposes, what we want to see is overall, under this guideline overall, still filtering for criminal history 1, how high is this sentence? So we're going to look over here. Now we're going to select our charts. We're going to select because we have such a high case count, we're going to select the average. We're going to do trends for both, let's say, national, circuit, and district, because we do have high case counts here. And we're also going to select a trend for the compliance rates. We're just going to look at national here. And we're going to select the average degree of a departure or variance, trend, national, and we're just looking at judge-initiated below, which is your 3553, the judge exercising their discretion. So we generate the reports, and here we find that a 720-month sentence, or 60 years, is in the 99.9th percentile, meaning it's a near record sentence. There have been a few higher, and this one, the record sentence, 3,780 months, which we can assume was the statutory maximum available in a multi-count conviction. But short of that, it is near record. It ties the record for the Sixth Circuit, and well exceeds the record in the Western District of Michigan, which is where he was sentenced. So for that district, Nassar's 60-year sentence is now the new record. And so to get an idea of what his sentence looks like relative to the average imposed under 2G 2.2, we can see here. This is his sentence up here, and this is the average sentence imposed under 2G 2.2. So you can see how much of an outlier this particular sentence was. Now, I didn't review the plea agreement. He may have stipulated or essentially conceded to a sentence like this. Most plea agreements, even if the judge goes well above the guidelines, which the judge technically did not go above the guidelines here, but even in other plea agreements, with one waives the right to appeal, even if the judge goes above the guideline range. Now, what's interesting here is the judge did not go above the guideline range because you cannot give a sentence greater than life, of course. His guideline range was 360 months or 30 years to life. and the judge, of course, gave 60 years. But Dr. Nassar is in his 50s, so obviously even a 60-year sentence, even though technically is not a life sentence, it clearly is from a de facto perspective. So, if you will, that Dr. Nassar got a sentence of life imprisonment. And we look here, this shows you the average sentences for this in the Sixth Circuit. It was only 105 months last year compared to a 720-month sentence. And then here within the district, West District of Michigan, the average sentence under 2G 2.2 last year was only 133 months, well below the 720 months that Dr. Nassar gave, or was given. Here, this shows you the rate of downward variances, and this is very interesting. 2G 2.2 is an anomalous guideline. It has far and away the highest rate of downward variances by judges. There's a variety of problems, well noted, both by academics as well as courts across the country, that 2G 2.2 is overly punitive. Of course, the facts of Dr. Nassar's case, arguably did deserve such a high sentence, regardless of the overly punitive nature of 2G 2.2. And then here, this final chart here indicates the degree of downward variance when judges do decide to vary. How far down are they varying? And they are varying downward below the bottom of the guideline range when they vary below the guideline range by about 5 years, just over 5 years. And we'll just do one other quick run. Let's just look at offense level 42 and see where his sentence comes out here. Because again, we did not filter by the final offense level, but we can go back, edit the report, and quickly filter for that. So all we're going to do is turn this filter on. So let's look at offense level 42 and compare him to those 122. See where a 60-month sentence lies, even for those individuals. And we don't really need to run any of the charts here. We could just look at the box at the top. That's what we'll do. So generate our report. And we can see here that even filtering for an offense level 42, which is 360 to life. By the way, the 470 here indicates life. The way the Sentencing Commission records life sentences, obviously life is an indeterminate sentence. So if the Commission did not give a number to a life sentence, then no one would be able to analyze life sentences. They essentially would be meaningless, statistically speaking. So, somewhat arbitrarily, the Commission chose a sentence of 470 months to indicate a life term. So, when you literally look at the data files at the Sentencing Commission, you will see a sentence of 470 months. Even though judges do not impose 470 months, they just say life. Nonetheless, the Commission records it as 470. So that's what we've indicated here, or that's why we indicate the guideline range for offense level 42 is 360 to 470 months. If you were to look at the actual sentencing table, it would say 360 to life. But again, we're looking at the actual data from the Commission's data files. So at any rate, a sentence of 60 years still is in the 99.4th percentile. So that means it's still among the highest, or nearly a record sentence for this offense level in this criminal history category nationwide. This 99.4% is taken from this case count of 122 nationwide. We can see that the maximum sentence here still was quite a bit higher at 1,020 months. But now we can see that for an offense level 42, criminal history 1, who pled guilty and was sentenced under 2G 2.2, record sentence in the Sixth Circuit, record sentence for the other two that were sentenced in the Western District of Michigan, a record sentence there as well. Why this could be relevant? Well, for purposes of appeal. This certainly, on its face, is, well, it's unusual in the fact that it's a record sentence, at least for that circuit, and nearly a record sentence nationwide. So what one could potentially argue is that it is substantively unreasonable from a statistical perspective. Do the facts underlying the case warrant such a high sentence of 60 years? So that will conclude this week's session of our weekly roundup. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next week. And by the way, if any of the viewers have or hear of interesting cases, interesting pleas, or interesting sentencings out there, please do post them on YouTube, or you can send us an email. Excuse me. And we'd be happy to consider cases and do analyses as part of our weekly roundup. Thank you again.